Barna Group. We have David on periodically about some of the great things that Barna Group is doing, and we want to talk to him specifically about a series of mini books called Frames. This is the Season 1 collection. David, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
So this is a series of mini books. It says Season 1 collection. It's like owning the first season of 24 or Lost or something like that. This is going to be one of a series of mini books. So let me ask you this. What is this and how is it meant to be helpful to the average Christian?
Well, one of the things that we learn here at Barna is that our world is speeding up. It's much more complex to be a Christian in our culture. The phrase that we have used very often to describe it is digital Babylon. It's a very confusing, complex sort of world, and much like Daniel might have experienced in the Old Testament. And so what we're trying to do is use the best research that we can conduct and provide short little reads on these complex issues to give Christians kind of a handle, a way forward, a way of thinking about these particular issues from a very theological perspective. So that was really the thought behind Frames and really the vision behind it.
David, give us just a little deeper sense of what are the topics? I'm looking at some of them on the Amazon page here, but just give our listeners a flavor of what they're going to find here, what topics you're covering.
Well, a couple of the key ones are issues of digital life. So one is called The Hyperlinked Life. It's a book that I wrote that looks at sort of the effect of the digital technology, sort of the information revolution, the fact that we now have access to virtually any fact from our fingertip, from our smartphone. And so that one really talks about this idea of how to think theologically about the information that we're given. We make the argument in that particular frame, which is this little mini book. It's about 100 pages, and you can read it in an hour, hour and a half. We make the argument that basically, you've heard of time, treasure, and talent as issues of stewardship. We now say that our technology, the fourth T, is an issue of stewardship as well. And so it's designed for, a Christian family to go through and really describe, to think about how they use these screens and how they use this information in a way that glorifies God.
Now, Barna, the group, David, that you are the president of, has, well, I don't know, maybe the last 10 years, I forget when maybe the late 90s, but when you guys came on the scene, and you can tell me exactly when you started, but you just started doing some great work in terms of not just simply doing surveys and polls, but tying those to important cultural trends. You were kind of connecting the dots, and you not only were doing that from a Christian worldview, but you were also helping to focus some of these surveys on what Christians do and what is a born-again Christian and who's an evangelical Christian and those kinds of things. So tell us a little bit about how Barna got started and why you think these kinds of things, these kinds of surveys, this kind of data, which is expressed in the Frames Season 1 collection, why this is so important for Christians.
Well, it actually goes back to 1984. George Barna started the company, so we're 30 years old this year. And then he wrote a book that was very influential in the church in 1990, about 6 years after he began, called The Frog in the Kettle. And it was a description of, when the frog, like the church, is in a culture that's slowly changing, we don't even notice the changes. And we become sort of, boiled alive with the cultural changes that are happening. And so, for 30 years we've been doing that kind of work. And I've been with the company now for 19 years. And then a few years ago I wrote a book called Unchristian, which was really the first kind of book that I had written. George had written many books by that time. But combined, George Barna and I are really focusing on trying to help, navigate this cultural change and give Christians handles for that. One of the Frames projects, for instance, is called Fighting for Peace. It's about violence, how comfortable we have become, how much we become like the frog when it comes to violent entertainment. And, anybody whose kid has read The Hunger Games or watched the movies or, enjoys violent, sort of violent-leaning video games ought to read Fighting for Peace, one of the frames, because it gives you a theological perspective about violence. It's a beautifully written essay about how we can think theologically about the violence that we're so constantly exposed to. And so that's been the vision for Barna really from the beginning.
David, let me ask you something about the hyperlinked life. You guys have been watching the culture for 30 years, and I'm reflecting. I remember when Frog in the Kettle came out, and what a groundbreaking book that was, but that was pre-Facebook, pre-Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all the smartphones, all the stuff of life we take for granted. How has the digital revolution changed our culture? And is it mostly good or mostly bad, or is the answer to that, it depends?
Yeah. Well, it very much depends, and I think part of the reason they're such powerful tools is that they're so useful. To be able to call somebody from your car, or to have access when you're traveling, or when you're just out running errands. I mean, cell phones and computers and Facebook. I mean, there's a real reason that people use them, because they do connect us in very powerful ways. So I think the jury is still out, and a lot of it really depends. This is the argument that we make in both the Hyperlink Life, as well as another frame called Greater Expectations, how to stay sane and succeed in an always on demand age. And I think that's really what we're saying, is that it's not that these technologies are in and of themselves evil or that they're good. The thing for us as Christians is what we make of them determines whether they can be used for evil or for good. So obviously pornography is much more accessible now in the screen age than it has been before. You don't have to go to a store to buy a magazine. People can find pornography with just a click of a button or a swipe of the finger on your screen. And so we have to think theologically. We have to prepare our students, our kids. I have three children myself. I'm 14, 13, and 9. And we have to prepare our own kids to think well and think theologically and think as Christians in this age. What we find in the research was there's almost no difference between Christians and non-Christians when it comes to how we use our technology. We are just as addicted to our screens. We go to bed with them. We wake up to them. We never have any kind of digital breaks. We take them to church. They become almost like an appendage, an extra arm or leg. And it's not evil. It's just what we do with them that I think determines whether God can use these tools as part of His mission in the world.
We're talking to David Kinnaman, president of Barna Group. We're talking with him on the cultural trends. In the series Frames, which is a series of 9 mini books put out by the Barna Group. I didn't know that the Barna Group had been in existence for 30 years. It's been doing great work in putting its finger on the trends that are occurring in the culture. I want to let our listeners know that this series is more than we have been talking about digital trends, but this series touches things such as adoption, foster care, and mentoring, talking about some of the trends involved in living out God's heart for orphans. It also covers things like multi-careering, doing work that matters at every stage of your journey, schools in crisis, Wonder Women, navigating the challenges of motherhood, career, and identity. Also, Sacred Roots, and I want to direct my next question, David, to you about this. Sacred Roots, why the church still matters, and the key trend here that you've identified is that 51% of people don't think it's important to attend church. Now, is that a percentage that has gone up or stayed the same, or has it dropped? And whatever the trend is, what does it portend for the importance of the church in our culture?
Yeah, what's happened is that the number of people who say that going to church is important has dropped in the last several decades, and really even more to the point, there's a growing number of people who not just say that it's unimportant, but are actually actively against church going. They you've kind of heard of the aggressive, atheists. They're almost evangelistically atheist, and I think that's part of what's happening is that there's a real push against church and church going, and this is an absolutely beautiful essay called Sacred Roots about why rootedness, why planting yourself in a community of faith, why going to church matters. And one thing to point out is that, what we've done with frames is that there's a combination of data and infographics, so color charts and graphics about the things we learned in our research, all in a real kind of magazine-like way. But then we've partnered with various people who are kind of thought leaders in their own way. So the writer for Sacred Roots is John Tyson, a really good leader in church in New York City, and so we're getting tons of great feedback from all the frames, but particularly that one, as people say, wow, this is giving me a new vision for church. It's almost like a tool you can read yourself, give to your 20-something kids and grandkids about why church is important, and you can also give it to non-Christians because it's such a beautiful kind of exploration of why church could matter in our time today. And again, each of these tools is designed to help us make sense of a changing mindset in America today, and that's important relative to church.
Our guest has been David Kinnaman, president of Barna Group. We've been discussing the new mini-book series just released by Barna called Frames, Season 1 Collection. We've got about 15 seconds. David, where can people get this?
Well, it's available pretty much everywhere books are sold, and you can buy them either as a box set, all 9 of them, or you can buy them individually. So we appreciate you taking a look at them. We think they're really cool ways of understanding culture and making a difference for Christ.
All right. Well, David, thank you so much for being on the air with us. We appreciate it.
It is my pleasure. Thanks, guys.
All right, folks.